Hello. Happy Wednesday. I see Farmhouse in the chat, and then I see another TV viewer and Casino Thanks. Alright. Hi, Casino Thanks. Don't recognize your name. And the Sharkies. Hello, Sharkies. Happy Wednesday, Sharkies. How are you doing this week? This day before Remembrance Day? Is my sound coming through okay? Everything's all right? Farmhouse and I went to see The Eternals on Sunday. We went on Sunday because Monday was Benedict Day. So we decided to go the day before, so as not to leave him all on his own while we went to see a movie on his adoption day. Speaking of Benedict, hi puppy. You want a snack? You want a little treat? Oh. High five. No. Sharkies. I sound great. Oh, thank you. Sharky's quite sleepy. Just woke up from a nap and had dinner. Still recovering from sinus troubles. Ugh. Yeah, I'm a little sleepy this evening. Not the absolute worst, but just a little. But we are running our second session. We're taking advantage of the day off, even though it is Remembrance Day tomorrow, but we're taking advantage to run the second session of Curse of Strahd tomorrow. Resuming where we left our players in the secret room in a haunted house. I guess just outside the secret room is where they left off. Just after having read an ominous letter from Strahd von Zarovich to the owners of the house that they are currently trapped within. So that's going to be fun. Going through that. We're starting a little earlier in the day tomorrow. I don't know how long we'll actually play for. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, Farmhouse and I went and saw Eternals. It wasn't my favorite Marvel movie. Of the recent ones, out of the recent three that we've seen, which is Eternals, Shang-Chi, and Black Widow, I think Shang-Chi was by far my favorite. Shang-Chi was actually like a great movie. Eternals was okay. It wasn't anything special. I don't know. It felt kind of like an info dump to me. Like they needed this movie to set some stuff up for later movies in this like phase of the MCU or something like that. So I don't know. It was okay. It had some good action scenes, I suppose, and you know, it looked fun. It looked neat, but it wasn't as fun of a movie as Shang-Chi was, I found. So there's my little mini review. Farmo says Eternals was like an entertaining Marvel history lesson, like a Greek mythology movie. Shang-Chi was like a good modern kung fu movie. Yeah, Yeah. What else? And then we had Been a Big Day. I think the Sharkies have seen the video that I posted about our snack battle that we held. Snack research. And that was just over on this side here where we filmed that. Results somewhat inconclusive. Like what you hope a movie of the Silmarillion would be like? Maybe. I guess I haven't really read the Silmarillion, so I can't offer much input. I mean, history lesson, not snack research. Yeah. Yeah, at the end of the snack battle, Apple came out on top as the supreme snack, but there may have been some influential factors, some outside factors influencing things, such as which side, left or right, the snacks were placed on, things like that may have influenced the results. And I'm not sure how we would narrow that down. Um, I heard a boof over there. What was that? What was that, Benedict? What are you barking at? Or getting ready to bark at? And what have the Sharkies been up to since last Friday? You mentioned having sinus troubles. That's not fun sounding, especially if it's also sapping your energy. Yes, he. Our when we first got him 3 years ago. I think this was his third adoptiversary. Is that right? I think it's third. When we first got him, he flew in from Korea. He was rescued from he was rescued from a, a not great place in Korea, and he flew over to the Seattle airport. So we drove all the way down to Seattle and picked him up at like 6 o'clock in the evening, from the airport, and did all the paperwork and stuff there. And then we drove back, and I don't think we got back until it was well after midnight. It was probably like 1 or 2 in the morning or something like that. And Farmos and I were quite hungry. Benedict just slept in the back of the car for the whole drive. In his little carrier. And we were quite hungry, and the only place we found on the way that was open was, like, when we were almost home, there was an A&W. So we stopped and we brought him out into the parking lot, and he was still too kind of afraid to even walk around at all at that point. So he just sat down on the ground, and we were like, oh no. So we put him in. We had a little carrier that I could carry, and we put him in there, and we asked the people at the A&W if he could sit inside with us as long as he stayed in his carrier, and they were like, yeah, sure. And so his first sort of treat in North America, really was an A&W French fry. So there's the little story with the A&W fry and Benedict. Um, and yeah, like Farmo said, we picked basically 10 of his favorite treats. Whipped cream was one of the things on there, and I wouldn't say that's one of his favorite treats. That's something he almost never ever has. It's probably only his like third or fourth time ever having whipped cream. Um, but we had stopped at Starbucks earlier that day, so we got him a little puppuccino, a little cup with some whipped cream in it, from there, and so we decided to include it in the snack battle. But other than that, yeah, the other 9 snacks were all favorites of his. I feel like I'm a little out of focus back here. Hello, camera. Here's my hand. Here's me bringing it back to where I want you to look. Oh, look at me. Maybe it's just my imagination. But yeah, so I kind of thought that snap peas might come out on top because he loves snap peas, but I think he also has them more frequently than the other snacks, and also they don't smell as strongly as like apple and cheese and things. So I'm thinking that that was an influencing factor on what ended up winning the snack battle. I'm sure we probably could have come up with some other snacks, but it would have required a little more prep to get like watermelon or something like that. All ready. I'm having a black cherry soda. I guess it's not really even. Yeah, it's soda. It's not cola. It's quite tasty. This Boylan's. This is not a product placement. Just showing you what I happen to have. Ericer is working on an essay, a school project tonight, so Ericer will not be joining us. Did you hear me talking about snacks? You're sitting back here licking your lips? Oh, I suppose you could have another treat. Just because you're so cute. And we were just talking about you, so you probably deserve it. Hey, don't lick your leg. Yeah, he's got that built-in makeup that makes him look concerned all the time. And then when he really wants to look concerned, he really can turn it up. Hey, hey, hey. No licking your leg. Hey, I said no. Hey. I'm watching you. Your kitty is all black, so no eyebrows, just void. That's, I don't know, that's a good look for a kitty to have. When you stare into the void stares back. Farmhouse says she loves black cats because they're so pretty, but Farmhouse loves all cats, which includes black cats. Black cats are included in all cats, but yes, all cats and dogs, and most other animals. Capybaras, beavers, squirrels, pangolins, yes. Your kitty was caught in a parking lot in Vancouver? Yeah, there's lots of. When I was younger, um, my mom and I were driving. We were in a McDonald's drive-through in Sardis, and this little kitten like walks up to our car in the drive-through. So we opened the door and we scooped up this kitten, and for the next few years, this cat lived with us. And then one day he just kind of went off on his own, back off into the forest in Cultus Lake. And I saw him again sometime later with another cat, so I'd like to think he went off to have a family, but yeah. Yes, Farmo says, in a much better place now. House is greater than parking lot for living. You've heard of multiple families who were chosen by cats in parking lots? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if the cat that we scooped up had been like full grown or something, we wouldn't have done so because I would have assumed that he belonged to someone, maybe. At least if there was a collar or something like that, or, a tattoo. But this was just a kitten out in a parking lot or in a drive through. So we were like, first of all, we don't want this cat to get hit by another car. And second of all, if this kitty. Ben, hey. If this kitty belonged to someone else, they probably wouldn't be out in a drive through, so. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a dog that I could identify as being a stray in BC, but I think it's easier for cats to end up that way. Anyways, it's just past 7:15. Um, so, last time in Guards, Vimes got fired by Wants, and was for thinking he saw a dragon that ended up actually being a raven, and putting the head of the Teachers Guild into quite a bad way. And so Vimes got told to hand in his badge, and he was feeling kind of all sorts of emotions about that. But then, after he went back to Sedopolis Yard and noticed that Errol, the swamp dragon, was having all kinds of gastrointestinal distress, he heard the sounds of a mob as the actual dragon approached the coronation grounds. And so Vimes heard the sounds of said mob and put his helmet back on his head and sauntered out of the building. So, prior to that, the dragon was discovered, so to speak, by Sergeant Colon, who had been sitting on its tail unknowingly. Ben. Sharkies love how much the book plays out like a medieval cop show. Yes, that is definitely something that I enjoy about the Guards series overall, is the like semi film noir but in a ridiculous fantasy setting style. On a similar but less well done note, not to be overly critical, but the Dresden books by Jim Butcher are like they're set in Chicago, and the title character, Harry Dresden, is a wizard that hires himself out as a detective, basically, for supernatural problems in Chicago. And so it definitely is, they're kind of popcorn novels, but they they play out in sort of a film noir PI kind of way, except with the main character being a wizard and there being various fae folk and all sorts of supernatural creatures and cultists and things like that making appearances. A fair amount of interactions with the fae courts, and things like that. I've got a few of those that I need to catch up on because I had read all of them, and then there was like a period of a few years where it seemed like he didn't release any. And now I think a bunch more of those books have come out that I have to catch up on. But I feel like I might need to reread some of them in order to remember everything that was happening, because it's been a while. Anyways, did I forget any details about what was happening? Carrot and Nobby and Sergeant Colin were up on a rooftop, which is where they discovered the dragon. I think that's roughly where they left off. Honestly, I think that's pretty much it. I think some big things were happening, but they were happening somewhat slowly. Also the librarian. The librarian went back in time a week, read the book about summoning dragons, then followed the thief after the book was stolen to the headquarters of the Elucidated Brethren, and then followed the Supreme Grand Master home afterwards, presumably discovering the identity of said Supreme Grand Master. And then I believe the librarian set off back to the library to find his way back to his present time, to follow the string back. I'm pretty sure that's roughly what happened with the librarian. So that's probably the other important occurrence. And I think that catches us up. So what do you say, chaps? Shall I get back to it? I think I shall. People streamed past Vimes as he strolled up the street of Small Gods. Smoke rose into the air from the Plaza of Broken Moons. The dragon squatted in the middle of it, on what remained of the coronation dais. It had a self-satisfied expression. There was no sign of the throne or of its occupant, although it was possible that complicated forensic examination of the small pile of charcoal in the wrecked and smoldering woodwork might offer some clue. Vimes caught hold of an ornamental fountain to steady himself as the crowds stampeded by. Every street out of the plaza was packed with struggling bodies. Not noisy ones, Vimes noticed. People weren't wasting their breath with screaming anymore. There was just this solid, deadly determination to be somewhere else. The dragon spread its wings and flapped them luxuriously. The people at the rear of the crowd took this as a signal to climb up the backs of the people in front of them and run for safety from head to head. Within a few seconds, the square was empty of all save the stupid and the terminally bewildered. Even the badly trampled were making a spirited crawl for the nearest exit. Vimes looked around him. There seemed to be a lot of fallen flags, some of which were being eaten by an elderly goat which couldn't believe its luck. He could distantly see Cut-Me-Own-Throat on his hands and knees, trying to restore the contents of his tray. By Vimes's side, a small child waved a flag hesitantly and shouted, "Hurrah!" Then everything went quiet. Vimes bent down. "I think you should be going home," he said. The child squinted up at him. "Are you a watchman?" it said. "No," said Vimes. "And yes." "What happened to the king, watchman?" I think he's gone off for a rest," said Vimes. "My auntie said I shouldn't talk to watchmen," said the child. "Do you think it might be a good idea to go home and tell her how obedient you've been, then?" said Vimes. "My auntie said if I was naughty, she'd put me up on the roof and call the dragon," said the child conversationally. My auntie said it eats you all up, starting with the legs, so you can see what's happening. Why don't you go home and tell your auntie she's acting in the best traditions of Ankh-Morpork child-rearing, said Vimes. Go on, run along. It crunches up all your bones, said the child happily. And when it gets to your head, it... Look, it's up there, shouted Vimes. The great big dragon that crunches you up. Now go home. The child looked up at the thing perched on the crippled dais. Dais? Yeah, whatever. I haven't seen it crunch anyone yet, it complained. I love how the child is referred to as it. Push off or you'll feel the back of my hand, said Vimes. This seemed to fit the bill. The child nodded understandingly. Right. Can I shout hurrah again? If you like, said Vimes. Hurrah! So much for community policing, Vimes thought. He peered out from behind the fountain again. A voice immediately above him rumbled. Gotta remember how to do this voice. I haven't done it for a few streams. Say what you like, I still swear it's a magnificent specimen. Vimes's gaze traveled upwards until it crested the edge of the fountain's top bowl. Have you noticed, said Sybil Ramkin, hauling herself upright by a piece of eroded statuary and dropping down in front of him, how every time we meet, a dragon turns up? She gave him an arch smile. It's a bit like having your own tune, or something. It's just sitting there, said Vimes hurriedly, just looking around, as if it's waiting for something to happen. The dragon blinked with Jurassic patience. It's an interesting phrase. Ben. No. The roads off the square were packed with people. That's the Ankh-Morpork. Benedict. Hey, cut it out. That's the Ankh-Morpork instinct, Vimes thought. Run away, and then stop and see if anything interesting is going to happen to other people. There was a movement in the wreckage near the dragon's front talon, and the high priest of Blind Io staggered to his feet, dust and splinters cascading from his robes. He was still holding the ersatz crown in one hand. Vimes watched the old man look upwards into a couple of glowing red eyes a few feet away. Can dragons read minds? Whispered Vimes. I'm sure mine understand every word I say, hissed Lady Ramkin. Oh no, the silly old fool is giving it the crown. But isn't that a smart move? Said Vimes. Dragons like gold. It's like throwing a stick for a dog, isn't it? Oh dear, said Sybil Ramkin. It might not, you know. Dragons have such sensitive mouths. The great dragon blinked at the tiny circle of gold. Then, with extreme delicacy, it extended 1 meter-long claw and hooked the thing out of the priest's trembling fingers. What do you mean, sensitive? Said Vimes, watching the claw travel slowly towards the long, horse-like face. A really incredible sense of taste. They're so, well, chemically orientated. You mean it can probably taste gold? Whispered Vimes, watching the crown being carefully licked. Oh, certainly. And smell it. Vimes wondered what the chances were of the crown being made of gold. Not high, he decided. Gold foil over copper, perhaps? Enough to fool human beings. And then he wondered what someone's reaction would be if they were offered sugar, which turned out, once you'd put 3 spoonfuls in your coffee, to be salt. The dragon removed the claw from its mouth in one graceful movement and caught the high priest, who was just sneaking away, a blow which knocked him high into the air. When he was screaming at the top of the ark, the great mouth came around and, "Gosh!" said Lady Ramkin. There was a groan from the watchers. "The temperature of the thing," said Vimes. "I mean, nothing left. Just a wisp of smoke." There was another movement in the rubble. Another figure pulled itself upright and leaned dazedly against a broken spar. It was Lupin Wantz, under a coating of soot. Vimes watched him look up into a pair of nostrils the size of drain covers. Wantz broke into a run. Vimes wondered what it felt like, running away from something like that, expecting any minute your backbone to reach, very briefly, a temperature somewhere beyond the vaporization point of iron. He could guess. Wantz made it halfway across the square before the dragon darted forward with surprising agility for such a bulk and snatched him up. The talon swept on upward until the struggling figure was being held a few feet from the dragon's face. It appeared to examine him for some time, turning him this way and that. Then, moving on its 3 free legs and flapping its wings occasionally to help with its balance, it trotted away across the plaza and headed towards what once had been the patrician's palace. To what once had been the king's palace, too. It ignored the frightened spectators silently pressing themselves against the walls. The arched gateway was shouldered aside with depressing ease. The doors themselves, tall and iron-bound and solid, lasted a surprising 10 seconds before collapsing into a heap of glowing ash. The dragon stepped through. Lady Ramkin turned in astonishment. Vimes had started to laugh. Farmo says, "I love how she flirts with him." The sort of shy, sarcastic bits she sticks in like, "Haha, I'm just kidding." Or am I? Yeah. Yeah, she's not completely subtle. Vimes had started to laugh. There was a manic edge to it, and there were tears in his eyes, but it was still laughter. He laughed and laughed until he slid gently down the edge of the fountain, his legs splaying out in front of him. "Hooray! Hooray! Hooray!" he giggled, almost choking. "What on earth do you mean?" said Lady Ramkin demanded. "Put out more flags! Blow the cymbals! Roast the tocsin! We've crowned it! We've got a king after all! What ho!" "Have you been drinking?" she snapped. "Not yet," sniggered Vimes. "Not yet. But I will be." He laughed on, knowing that when he stopped, black depression was going to drop on him like a lead soufflé. But he could see the future stretching out ahead of them. After all, it was definitely noble. And it didn't carry money, and it couldn't answer back. It could certainly do something for the inner cities, too, like torching them to the bedrock. We'll really do it, he thought. That's the Ankh-Morpork way. If you can't beat it, or corrupt it, you pretend it was your idea in the first place. Vivat Draco. Draco? He became aware that the small child had wandered up again. It waved its flag gently at him and said, "Can I shout hurrah again now?" "Why not?" said Vimes. "Everyone else will." From the palace came the muffled sounds of complicated destruction. Errol pulled a broomstick across the floor with his mouth and, whimpering with effort, hauled it upright. After a lot more whimpering and several false starts, he managed to winkle the end of it between the wall and the big jar of lamp oil. He paused for a moment, breathing like a bellows, and pushed. The jar resisted for a moment, rocked back and forth once or twice, and then fell over and smashed on the flagstones. Crude, very badly refined oil spread out in a black puddle. Errol's huge nostrils twitched. Somewhere in the back of his brain, unfamiliar synapses clicked like telegraph keys. Great bulks of information flooded down the thick nerve cord to his nose, carrying inexplicable information about triple bonds, alkanes, and geometric isomerism. Isomerism? Isomerism? I don't know. However, almost all of it missed the small part of Errol's brain that was used for being Errol. All he knew was that he was suddenly very, very thirsty. Something major was happening in the palace. There was the occasional crash of a floor or thump of a falling ceiling. In his rat-filled dungeon, behind a door with more locks than a major canal network, the patrician of Ankh-Morpork lay back and grinned in the darkness. Outside, bonfires flared in the dusk. Ankh-Morpork was celebrating. No one was quite sure why, but they'd worked themselves up for a celebration tonight. Barrels had been broached, oxen had been put on spits, one paper hat and celebratory mug had been issued per child, and it seemed a shame to waste all that effort. Anyway, it had been a very interesting day, and the people of Ankh-Morpork set great store by entertainment. "The way I see it," said one of the revelers, halfway through a huge, greasy lump of half-raw meat, "a dragon as king mightn't be a bad idea. When you think it through, is what I mean." "It definitely looked very gracious," said the woman to his right, as if testing the idea. "Sort of, well, sleek. Nice and smart. Not scruffy. Takes a bit of a pride in itself." She glared at some of the younger revelers further down the table. "The trouble with people today is they don't take pride in themselves." "And there's foreign policy, of course," said a third, helping himself to a rib. "When you come to think about it." "What do you mean?" "Diplomacy," said the rib-eater, flatly. They thought about it. And then you could see them turning the idea around and thinking about it the other way, in a polite effort to see what the hell he was getting at. "Dunno," said the monarchical expert slowly. "I mean, your actual dragon, it's got these, basically, two sorts of ways of negotiation, hasn't it? I mean,
It's either roasting you alive, or it isn't. Correct me if I'm wrong, he added. That's my point. I mean, let's say the ambassador from Clatch comes along. You know how arrogant that lot are. Suppose he says, we want this, we want that, we want the other thing. Well, he said, beaming at them, what we say is, shut your face unless you want to go home in a jar.
They tried out this idea for mental fit. It had that certain something.
They've got a big fleet, Clatch, said the monarchist uncertainly. Could be a bit risky, roasting diplomats. People see a pile of charcoal come back on the boat. They tend to look a bit askance. And then we say, ho there, Johnny Clatchian. Oh boy. You no like 'em, big fellow lizard, belong sky, bake mud hut, belong you, pretty damn chop chop.
I have no idea what I just said. And honestly, I don't care to explore it that much. Farmo says Ankh-Morpork, chaotic neutral city. Happy so long as it's interesting and profitable. The Sharkies agree. Farmos is enjoying my angry parrot person voice. Angry racist parrot person voice.
We could really say that? Why not? And then we say, send plenty tribute, toot sweet. I never did like them Clatchians, said the woman firmly. The stuff they eat. It's disgusting. And gabbling away all the time in their heathen lingo.
In the shadows, a match flared. Vimes cupped his hands around the flame, sucked on the foul tobacco, tossed the match into the gutter, and slouched off down the damp, puddle-punctuated alley. If there was anything that depressed him more than his own cynicism, it was that quite often it still wasn't as cynical as real life. We've got along with the other guys for centuries, he thought. Getting along has practically been all our foreign policy. Now, I think I've just heard us declare war on an ancient civilization that we've always got along with, more or less, even if they do talk funny. And after that, the world, what's worse, will probably win. Similar thoughts, although with a different perspective, were going through the minds of the civic leaders of Ankh-Morpork when, next morning, each received a short note bidding them to be at the palace for a working lunch, by order. Sharky say, Vimes doing a strider, sitting in the dark, illuminated by flame. It didn't say whose order, or, they noted, whose lunch. Now they were assembled in the antechamber, and there had been changes. It had never been what you might call a select place. The patrician had always felt that if you made people comfortable, they might want to stay. The furniture had been a few very elderly chairs, and, around the walls, portraits of earlier city rulers holding scrolls and things. The chairs were still there,
The portraits were not. Or rather, the stained and cracked canvases were piled in a corner, but the gilt frames were gone. The counselors tried to avoid one another's faces and sat tapping their fingers on their knees. Finally, a couple of very worried-looking servants opened the doors to the main hall. Lupin once lurched through. Most of the counselors had been up all night anyway, trying to formulate some kind of policy vis-a-vis dragons. But once looked as though he hadn't been to sleep in years. His face was the color of a fermented dishcloth. Never particularly well padded, he now looked like something out of a pyramid. "Ah," he intoned. "Good. Are you all here? Then perhaps you would step this way, gentlemen." The head thief said the head thief. "The note mentioned lunch?" "Yes," said Once. "With a dragon?" "Good grief. You don't think it would eat you, do you?" said Once. "What an idea." "It never crossed me mind," said the head thief, relief blowing from his ears like steam. "The very idea. Ha ha." "Ha ha," said the chief merchant. "Ho ho," said the head assassin. "The very idea." "No, I expect you're all far too stringy," said Once. "Ha ha." "Ha ha. Ah ha ha. Ho ho." The temperature lowered by several degrees. Pupper's having a drink, if you're wondering what that sound is. "So, if you would kindly step this way." The great hall had changed. For one thing, it was a great deal greater. Several walls had been knocked into adjoining rooms, and the ceiling and several stories of upper rooms had been entirely removed. The floor was a mass of rubble except in the middle of the room, which was a heap of gold. Well, gold-ish. It looked as though someone had scoured the place for anything that shone or glittered. There were the picture frames, and the gold thread out of the tapestries, and silver, and the occasional gem. There were also tureens from the kitchen, candlesticks, warming pans, fragments of mirror, sparkly stuff. The counselors were not in a position to pay much attention to this, however, because of what was hanging above their heads. It looked like the biggest badly rolled cigar in the universe, if the biggest badly rolled cigar in the universe was in the habit of hanging upside down. Two talons could be dimly seen, gripping the dark rafters. Halfway between the glittering heap and the doorway, a small table had been laid. The counselors noted, without much surprise, that the familiar ancient silverware was missing. There were china plates and cutlery that looked as though it had very recently been whittled from bits of wood. Once took a seat at the head of the table and nodded to the servants. "Please be seated, gentlemen," he said. "I am sorry things are a little different, but the king hopes you will bear with it until matters can be more suitably organized." Said the head merchant. "The king?" repeated Once. His voice sounded one dribble away from madness. Oh, the king. Right, said the merchant. From where he was sitting, he had a good view of the big hanging thing. There seemed to be some movement there, some trembling in the great folds that wrapped it. Long life to him, say I, he added quickly. The first course was soup with dumplings in it. Once didn't have any. The rest of them ate in a terrified silence, broken only by the dull chiming of wood on china. There are certain matters of decree to which the king feels your assent would be welcome, said Wantz eventually. A pure formality, of course, and I am sorry to bother you with such petty detail. The big bundle appeared to sway in the breeze. No trouble at all, squeaked the head thief. The king graciously desires it to be known, said Wantz, that it would be pleased to receive coronation gifts from the population at large. Nothing complex, of course, simply any precious metals or gems they might have by them and can easily spare. I should stress, by the way, that this is by no means compulsory. Such generosity as he is confident of expecting should be an entirely voluntary act. The chief assassin looked sadly at the rings on his fingers and sighed. The head merchant was already resignedly unclipping his gilt chain of office from around his neck. Why, gentlemen, said Wantz, this is most unexpected. Said the Arch-Chancellor of Unseen University. You will be... that is, I am sure the king is aware that traditionally the university is exempt from all city levies and taxes. He stifled a yawn. The wizards had spent the night directing their best spells against the dragon. It was like punching fog. My dear sir, this is no levy, protested Wantz. I hope that nothing I have said would lead you to expect anything like that. Oh, no, no. Any tribute should be, as I said, entirely voluntary. I hope that is absolutely clear. As crystal, said the head assassin, glaring at the old wizard. And these entirely voluntary tributes we are about to make, they go on the hoard, said Wantz. Ah. While I am positive the people of the city will be very generous indeed once they fully understand the situation, said the head merchant, I am sure the king will understand that there is very little gold in Ankh-Morpork. Good point, said Wantz. However, the king intends to pursue a vigorous and dynamic foreign policy which should remedy matters. Ah, the councillors chorused, rather more enthusiastically this time. Farmo says, reminds me of voluntold. Yeah. For example, Wantz went on, the king feels that our legitimate interests in Quirm, Stolat, Pseudopolis, and Sort have been seriously compromised in recent centuries. This will be speedily corrected, and, gentlemen, I can assure you that treasure will positively flow into the city from those anxious to enjoy the king's protection. The head assassin glanced at the hoard. A very definite idea formed in his mind as to where all that treasure would end up. You had to admire the way dragons knew how to put the bite on. It was practically human. Oh, he said.
Sharkies say the people support a bully if the bully's on their side. Not entirely certain they understand whether the bully is on their side just yet. Give all the gold to the dragon and it will probably trickle outwards, right? Of course, there will probably be other acquisitions in the way of land, property, and so forth, and the king wishes it to be fully understood that loyal privy councillors will be richly rewarded. And, said the head assassin, who was beginning to feel that he had got a firm grip on the nature of the king's mental processes. No doubt the, privy councillors, said Once. No doubt they will respond with even greater generosity in the matters of, for example, treasure. I am sure such considerations haven't crossed the king's mind, said Once. But the point is very well made. I thought it would be. The next course was fat pork, beans, and floury potatoes. More, as they couldn't help noticing, fattening food. Once had a glass of water. Which brings us on to a further matter of some delicacy, which I am sure that well-travelled, broad-minded gentlemen such as yourselves will have no difficulty in accepting, he said. The hand holding the glass was beginning to shake. I hope it will also be understood by the population at large, especially since the king will undoubtedly be able to contribute in so many ways to the well-being and defense of the city. For example, I am sure the people will rest more contentedly in their beds knowing that the king is tirelessly protecting them from harm. There can, however, be ridiculous ancient prejudices which will only be eradicated by ceaseless work on the part of all men of good will. He paused and looked at them. The head assassin said later that he had looked into the eyes of many men who, obviously, were very near death, but he had never looked into eyes that were so clearly and unmistakably looking back at him from the slopes of hell. He hoped he would never, he said, ever have to look into eyes like that again. I am referring, said Once, each word coming slowly to the surface, like bubbles in some quicksand, to the matter of the king's diet. There was a terrible silence. They heard the faint rustle of wings behind them, and the shadows in the corners of the hall grew darker and seemed to close in. Diet, said the head thief, in a hollow voice. Yes, said Once. His voice was almost a squeak. Sweat was dripping down his face. The head assassin had once heard the word rictus and wondered when you should use it correctly to describe someone's expression, and now he knew. That was what Once's face had become. It was the ghastly rictus of someone trying not to hear the words his own mouth was saying. We,
Er, we thought, said the head assassin, very carefully, that the king, well, must have been arranging matters for himself over the weeks. Ah, but poor stuff, poor stuff. Stray animals and so forth, said Once, staring hard at the tabletop. Obviously, as king, such makeshifts are no longer appropriate. The silence grew and took on a texture. The counselors thought hard, especially about the meal they had just eaten. The arrival of a huge trifle with a lot of cream on it only served to concentrate their minds. Said the head merchant. How often is the king hungry? All the time, said Once, but it eats once a month. It is really a ceremonial occasion. Of course, said the head merchant. It would be. And, said the head assassin, when did the king last, eat? I'm sorry to say, it hasn't eaten properly ever since it came here, said Once. Oh. You must understand, said Once, fiddling desperately with his wooden cutlery, that merely waylaying people like some common assassin— Excuse me, the head assassin began. Some common murderer, I mean. There is no satisfaction there. The whole essence of the king's feeding is that it should be, well, an act of bonding between king and subjects. It is perhaps a living allegory. Allegory? Reinforcing the close links between the crown and the community, he added. The precise nature of the meal, the head thief began, almost choking on the words. Are we talking about young maidens here? Sheer prejudice, said Once. The age is immaterial. Marital status is, of course, of importance. And social class. Something to do with flavor, I believe. He leaned forward, and now his voice was pain-filled and urgent and, they felt, genuinely his own for the first time. Please consider it, he hissed. After all, just one a month, in exchange for so much. The families of people of use to the king, privy councillors such as yourselves, would not, of course, even be considered. And when you think of all the alternatives— They didn't think about all the alternatives. It was enough to think about just one of them. Farmhouse and Sharkies are confirming allegory. The silence purred at them as Once talked. They avoided one another's faces, for fear of what they might see mirrored there. Each man thought, one of the others is bound to say something soon, some protest, and then I'll murmur agreement, not actually say anything. I'm not as stupid as that, but definitely murmur very firmly. So the others will be in no doubt that I thoroughly disapprove, because at a time like this it behooves all decent men, to nearly stand up and be almost heard. But no one said anything. The cowards, each man thought. And no one touched the pudding or the brick-thick chocolate mints served afterwards. They just listened in flushed, gloomy horror as Wance's voice droned on. And when they were dismissed, they tried to leave as separately as possible, so that they didn't have to talk to one another. Farmo says thoughts and prayers from the privy councillors. Wow. Except for the head merchant, that is. He found himself leaving the palace with the chief assassin, and they strolled side by side, minds racing. The chief merchant tried to look on the bright side. He was one of those men who organize sing-songs when things go drastically wrong. There you go, there's your thoughts and prayers. Sharkies say those were no thin dinner mints. Well, well, he said. So, we're privy councillors now. Just fancy. Said the assassin. I wonder what's the difference between ordinary councillors and privy councillors, wondered the merchant aloud. Excuse my language, covered the youngin's ears. The assassin scowled at him. I think, he said, it is because you're expected to eat shit. He turned the glare back on his feet again. What kept going through his mind were Wance's last words as he shook the secretary's limp hand. He wondered if anyone else had heard them. Unlikely. They'd been a shape rather than a sound. Wance had simply moved his lips around them while staring fixedly at the assassin's moon-tanned face. Help me. The assassin shivered. Why him? As far as he could see, there was only one kind of help he was qualified to give, and very few people ever asked for it themselves. In fact, they usually paid large sums for it to be given as a surprise present to other people. He wondered what was happening to Wance that made any alternative seem better. Farmhouse is talking about the mints at the Dutch and putting them in her coffee. Once, let's see, it's 8:08. Let's see how long this next bit is. The next bit goes on for a few pages. So maybe this is a good place to stop for the evening. So that was a creepy dinner, huh? Or lunch, working lunch, I suppose. Not, I don't know. Having lunch with a dragon doesn't seem like the most fun time. Come here, Ben. Come here. I say come here and he runs away. He knows I want to pick him up and put him on my lap. Sharkies say, certainly working up to Mr. Creosote. Which I think is maybe how that's pronounced. I really have no idea. Suppose that's why they needed brick mints. Well, not the most cheerful of episodes.
All this talk of the sacrificing of maidens. Not necessarily young maidens, just maidens. Pharma says that whole fatty foods detail with that one, such a good detail to have. Like, I could be fattening you up. You never know. Like a food threat. Yeah, and then you've got Want sitting there having a glass of water. Like, he knows what's going on. Oh boy. Sharky say, I would lose. I'm a sucker for a free lunch. The sheer terror Want has in that scene is so well done, says Farmos. You know, I don't know if I could eat food while someone's sitting there talking about eating people. And one of the courses included fatty pork. I don't know. I don't think think I might lose my appetite. Yeah. Oh boy. Well, I'm gonna stop there. I've got a little bit of driving to do. I'm gonna go pick up a friend who's gonna hang out tonight, who's in our D&D game tomorrow. We've got a spare bed, so it works out. But yeah, this was yeah, the kid. Can I say hurrah again? Whenever the kid said hurrah too, it was hurrah with a period at the end, not an exclamation mark. Like, picturing this little kid with a little flag thing being like, hurrah. Not the most enthusiastic. Sharky say, I think if I staged this book as a play, the Greek chorus would be that kid. Did we look up whether this had already been adapted as a play? I don't remember. I feel like it probably has been, but maybe, maybe not. Farmos is 98% certain it has. That 2% of doubt. Sharkies don't remember checking. That would be a fun press gang production. All right, well, I'm going to say good evening to you folks. Have a lovely night, and I hope you have a nice Remembrance Day tomorrow. And hopefully I'll see you on Friday evening before the weekend. So I'll see you then. Have a good night. Bye-bye.